I have a confession to make. I have never finished Final Fantasy Crisis Core until now. Final Fantasy VII was one of the first ever JRPGs that I found myself extremely immersed in. The first one I ever played was actually Dragon Warrior on the NES, but it had been years since I played that before I got a chance to play another proper Japanese RPG. I fell into the whole Final Fantasy VII worldwide phenomenon when the game came out, but not for all the same reasons that I love it today. Back then, it was mostly just the really awesome graphics, believe it or not, and the incredible music that really pulled me into the Final Fantasy series to begin with. So, why didn't I ever give Crisis Core a chance? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It came out on the Sony PSP, which was a device I never got a chance to own. I did try it out a couple times here or there on emulation, but it just never really stuck. And I think that is a testament to the original PSP version of Crisis Core, where now that we have Crisis Core Reunion, Square Enix has been able to flex some of their more modern game dev muscles and mold Crisis Core into a game that works for people in the modern era. From my understanding is it tells pretty much the exact same story. It doesn't change much in terms of the skeleton of the game, but it does fix a lot of the issues that were a result of being on the PSP so many years ago and allowed them to implement some of their newly developed skills that they've learned on the more modern Final Fantasy games they've been creating lately. I think I can say pretty honestly here early in the video that yes, the new Crisis Core Reunion does hold up today. If you've never played it before, now is as good a time as any to jump in and give this classic a proper try. But I will say it's not all sunshine and rainbows with Crisis Core Reunion. In this video, I'm going to go over the good and the bad of Crisis Core Reunion and hopefully allow you to come to your own conclusion on whether or not it's a game you think is worth investing your time and money into in 2026. Before I dive fully into the meat and potatoes of this video, I want to make a couple things clear. One, this is not a comparison to the original Crisis Core that came out on the PSP. I have so little experience with that version of the game. I have almost no memory of specifics about that particular version. So I am looking at Crisis Core Reunion on its own, not compared to the PSP version. Secondly, this is going to be a non spoiler talk about Crisis Core. I will not be talking about anything that will spoil the story for you, but the visuals might show you some characters or some moments that may be considered spoilers. I'm going to try to keep the footage mostly to side mission content and early chapter content, but even then, some people might find something that is somewhat spoilery there, so proceed at your own risk. Okay, now let's get into it. Crisis Core Reunion is a bit of a mashup between a remake and a remaster of the original PSP version, which was meant to be a prequel to Final Fantasy VII. The main character is Zack Fair, who has a little bit of an appearance in the original Final Fantasy VII and is making more appearances in the new Final Fantasy VII remake and rebirth versions of the game. It controls like a action RPG, which is much closer to the current versions of those Final Fantasy VII games that I just mentioned. It gives the illusion of the old ATB system where you can toggle through your different items and things like that, but it does work in a very unique way, which we'll certainly get into. I would say that it probably does require some previous Final Fantasy VII knowledge in order to fully enjoy. I suppose you could start the series with this game, but I think a lot of the context is going to be missing, especially when you're going through certain parts that the player is meant to know what's going on here or meant to know what is going to happen, which actually adds a lot of weight to some of the cutscenes and some of the conversations that characters have together. If you didn't have that previous knowledge, then it might still come across as a pretty good story and a pretty good game, but I think people who do have that previous knowledge are going to enjoy it much more. Basically, you're going to be going through either the main story missions, which have you walking around certain locales, whether it's inside your headquarters building or out in the city of Midgar, or even in some other alternate locations where you're exploring the map and getting into random battles from time to time, talking to different characters, watching cutscenes that move the story forward, and basically just rinse and repeat until you get to the end. But to break up the story, there are hundreds of side missions that you can partake in that give you chances to level up your character, obtain extra gear and materia, and different items that will help you become stronger and make the combat a little bit easier. Beyond that, it's really pretty much just that simple. You've got the main story missions that you'll be going through, and then you've got the side mission content, which is always there for you in case you just want to do a few quick battles and gain some gear, materia, and occasionally some levels. Speaking of levels, let's talk about the combat a little bit. Overall, I find the combat to be pretty enjoyable. It's very responsive, very flashy, fast paced, and Zack overall is just satisfying to control. There is probably enough enemy variety, but at the end of the day, you're really just kind of slicing through enemies no matter whether they're humanoid or robot or monster. Many enemies will have specific elemental weaknesses, and what I found I did was I just put a attack ability for each element onto my hotbar, and then I just had a basic attack. So anytime I was fighting somebody that had fire elemental weakness, I would just hit them with the fire ability or the ice ability or whatever. And it really was that simple essentially throughout the entire game. Now, this is the part where I have to admit that I did play the game on normal difficulty. I kind of regret that decision a little bit because it turns out that combat is incredibly forgiving on normal difficulty. I did manage to die a few times in some of the missions that I'll talk about soon. Certain enemies that are built to kind of stun lock you and essentially one shot you can get you from time to time. But as far as the story missions go, I was always ahead of the curve and never nervous about not being able to complete a mission. A big factor in the combat that people love to talk about with Crisis Core is the DMW, or the Digital Mind Wave. I think that there is an argument against the DMW overall, but personally, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. I went into the game knowing it was there and also knowing that it was somewhat divisive in the Final Fantasy community. And again, for good reasons in some aspects, but playing on normal difficulty, it never hindered me. Essentially, how the DMW works is that it is constantly spinning in the background as you fight. And every once in a while, you'll get specific combinations of numbers and portraits that will line up to give you certain results. For example, if you get 3 Sungs in a row, then you'll get a limit break ability that is centered around Sung. Or same thing with Sephiroth. If you get 3 Sephiroths, then you'll get a cool Sephiroth ability. It gets a little more confusing with the number combinations, where you might get something like all ones that result in temporary invincibility, which is incredibly overpowered. Or all fours, where AP cost is reduced to 0 for the rest of the battle. These different combinations will just help you in fun little ways that are sometimes completely overpowered, but other times just small little bonuses for you. One of the more divisive things about Crisis Core is that in order to actually raise Zack's level, you need to get 3 7s on the DMW. That's the only way you can level. You can't just grind over and over to obtain experience points and level that way. Although I do not have confirmation on this, but I have heard that there is some sort of experience point engine going on in the background that will essentially force the DMW to roll all 7s when it is about time for Zack to level up. So take that with a grain of salt. If that's true, that's probably a smart thing that they added, because otherwise you can just get incredibly unlucky and almost never level up. I did think the DMW overall was pretty cool thematically, though. It's different than what a lot of Final Fantasies do, but what I like to think of it as is some sort of mental, I mean, it's called a digital mind wave, so I like to think of it as some sort of mental imagery of what Zack is thinking about as he's battling. That's supported by the game because when you get to certain cutscenes that may be emotional or may be a little bit more high stakes, then Zack will get bonuses to those particular characters and higher chances of them showing up in the DMW during that story segment to highlight that Zack is really thinking about this person a lot. So during combat, he's going to use some of their limit breaks more often because it just makes sense for the story. After finishing the game, I came away from the DMW with a pretty positive opinion of it. Honestly, it's pretty cool. It's new, it's novel, and they never did it again, so you can't really complain too much about it when it was just in this one, admittedly pretty small Final Fantasy game. But again, I liked it overall. As far as other customization goes, the game offers a number of different accessories that you can equip, as well as a whole ton of materia that is available to you. On top of that, there's also a materia fusion system, which I wish I put a little bit more effort into, honestly. I think this is where playing on normal difficulty actually harmed my experience with the game a little bit, because I was able to just put on some simple elemental attack materia, and really the game never asked me to change it up from there. That worked throughout the entire game. I can imagine that there is a bunch of different build ideas out there and different materia fusions you can do to really power Zack up and make him strong enough to take on the hard difficulty, and there's probably a lot of fun in that, but I was just not forced to go too far into it, and I was pretty happy with my basic setup. So unfortunately I can't say too much more about that, but I do think there are some cool ideas worth exploring. I will say the materia fusion system was an interesting idea, but I don't know that they did it the way I personally would have liked. I thought I would be able to mix a fire and blizzard materia to make some sort of fire blizzard spell, or maybe a cure and Isuna materia to make a cure spell that also has Isuna, but that's not how it works. They will merge together in different ways that are determined by the game dev, I guess. I don't want to say it's random because it's not really random, but sometimes you can't easily make sense of why do these two materials form to make this one. But if you're playing on a harder difficulty, you are probably going to find some enjoyment in fooling around with that system, and there are probably some very broken options out there for you to mess around with. And you will have tons of missions available to mess around with those systems because of the side content that's available in Crisis Core in the form of missions. Essentially, each time you stop at a save point, you are able to go into the mission menu and basically just take on these training missions, I guess, at your leisure. And it feels like each time you complete one, it unlocks another one. So it's almost a never ending mill of missions. A lot of the missions are locked behind certain chapters in the main story, so they won't all be available to you from the beginning. You'll have to advance through the chapters and then more will become available. But if you manage to take care of all the missions and have none available as you move on, then kudos to you, because that is still a lot to do. I got myself to about 20 or 25% through the amount of missions that were available before I was happy with what I had done there, and I was strong enough to take on the main story. So I didn't go too much farther than that. But if I wanted to, there would have been a lot more available for me. I think this is pretty clearly a hangover from the PSP era. These missions were very clearly designed to be done in bite-sized chunks while you're waiting for the bus, or you have 5 minutes here or there to do some of these missions. And in that sense, I think they were a pretty good addition to the game, but they are extremely repetitive. I don't know, there's maybe 5 or 6, maybe 5 to 10 different environments that you're running through, but they get pretty repetitive pretty fast. And it's always just find this enemy and kill it, basically, while collecting some hidden chests around the map. So after doing 5 or 10 of these in a row, I was usually ready to move on and start doing some of the story. It felt like the missions were actually impacting the pacing of the story, even though I wasn't forced to do them. There's a little bit of a completionist part in probably most gamers that makes you think, well, these missions are available and they're possible to complete, so why don't I just complete them while I can and get this extra materia and gear, and again, occasionally levels as well. I don't hate the missions. I don't even hate that there's 300 of them. I think that it was a reasonable design choice to go that route for a game that was built for the PSP. Could they have changed it up and maybe enhanced it a little bit for the remaster? Yeah, probably, but you want to keep the core game still there, right? The Crisis Core, if I may. Finally, let's talk about the actual root of Final Fantasy Crisis Core Reunion. The reason why you are probably playing it. The story, the characters, the setting, and how it's all presented. To start off with some of the highest praise I can give Crisis Core Reunion, it has to be how well they nailed the setting and the atmosphere of Midgar and the Final Fantasy VII world. Whether it's using the exact perfect song at the exact right moment, or just the impressive visuals of Midgar or Aerith's church or parts of the Shinra building, this is where Crisis Core is at its best. And that's why I say earlier in the video that if you have some prior Final Fantasy VII experience, you're going to enjoy this a lot more. It's hard to explain the impact of meeting a character that everybody loves for the first time in a game that you know you're going to end up meeting, and then you hear that perfect song motif kick in, and before you even see the face of the person you're about to see, you already know who it is, and it just elevates the moments. And when Crisis Core was doing that, that is when it was at its best. There are definitely hiccups along the way as well, though. Not all of the characters that Crisis Core brought back land as well as some of the actual main characters do. I think a lot of the Turks are done very well. It was awesome to see Rude and Reno again. Cisne is an interesting character that I haven't fully formed an opinion on yet. I think Sung was a little bit of a disappointment, and I feel bad saying that because I'm sure everybody tried their best to make a good game here, but Sung didn't work so well with me. I found the voice acting to be a little bit stilted and just not on par with some of the other better characters in the game. I also wasn't the biggest fan of Genesis, who is one of the main new characters added to Crisis Core, along with Angeal, who I did like a little bit better. But I don't think the story was fully complete or long enough to be able to really flesh out these two characters specifically. For the Turks, you can fill in a lot of your own opinion of who the characters are because you have this experience with them in the original Final Fantasy VII and then also with the remakes as well. If you've played all those, you have a general idea of who these characters are, but the newer characters needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, in my opinion, to become Final Fantasy VII classic characters. You know what I mean when I say that. That's why I think you don't hear much about them in current day conversations because they just kind of come and go within this one little story. And they're not so likable that they maintain their presence in the current games. They try to do this thing with Genesis to make him a little bit quirky and a little bit different. And yeah, I mean, he certainly is different, but he's also not my favorite. I think Angeal could have been a better side character if he was around a little bit more and if the story was put together a little bit stronger to make his character really impact Zack how he's clearly meant to impact Zack. Speaking of Zack, though, Zack is one of the most likable Final Fantasy protagonists, in my opinion. And I think it sounds a little wild to say that because he's in such a small game here and is treated as a side character for the vast majority of the Final Fantasy VII universe. But he's just likable. That's all I can really say. I love his desire to be a hero, his happy-go-lucky attitude. He never turns away from any challenge. He takes them all head on. He has incredibly high confidence in himself. And he shows it too, not only in gameplay, but in cutscenes as well. You see him do some pretty badass stuff and just solidifies his character as a soldier. Aerith as well is done, in my opinion, just fantastically. She's obviously younger, but the voice actor for Aerith and Zack, when they work together, there is obvious chemistry there that just oozes out of the screen and into your brain as you watch the two of them together. I mentioned that Crisis Core is at its best when it is flexing its muscles in terms of atmosphere and presentation. Well, when Zack and Aerith are on the screen together, that is another form of that. Those were my favorite moments of the game. And a lot of that is because of nostalgia. Because as a Final Fantasy VII fan, you know about these two a little bit and you want to know more. You want to live through their experience and see it all because you've only really imagined it up until now. And I just think they really nailed that. Absolute perfection when it comes to Zack and Aerith together, which is what makes some of the other encounters a little bit more disappointing. It feels almost like Square Enix had their absolute A team and they're like, okay, you guys work on Zack and Aerith and Midgar and the overall presentation and the music choices and even the combat fluidity and all that. And then they had a B team where they were like, okay, you guys handle the Turks and Sephiroth and Angeal and Genesis and some other characters I am purposefully not naming. But then they also have a C team where they're like, okay, now you guys just kind of clean up the rest. All the NPCs, some of the more important characters that come around a little bit more often, even. And there's just so clearly a difference in quality with some of these characters compared to each other. I think there's no doubt about that. But what I can say for sure is that after completing the entire game and seeing everything from start to finish, I truly believe that the Crisis Core story holds up and helped me to get a much better understanding of what was going on during this time before Final Fantasy VII Original comes onto the stage and we start looking at primarily Cloud. It felt great to get a much better understanding of what happened before that. And they handled it extremely well overall. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I will say it was fantastic. It's not every day when you get to the end of a story game and you are right on the same page as the developers in how they wanted to end it. I already knew parts of how it was going to end because I know Zach's story, but even though I knew what was coming, when I could start to sense that we were getting there, I was on the edge of my seat, just holding my breath, waiting to get to that point and wanting to experience it in this game. And they nailed it, no doubt. So, even though there are parts of the story and the combat and the mission system and other parts of the game that do not reach 10 out of 10 status and will ultimately hold this game back a little bit because there are issues that are certainly there. When the game is doing what it does best, it is just absolute cinema. And I am very happy that I took the time out of my life to get through it. It's actually crazy that I went this long without fully going through the Crisis Core story and really getting enough time with Zach and Aerith and everybody else around that time in the story to just help me have a much better foundation in the Final Fantasy VII world. It feels like it made me a more knowledgeable fan playing this game, and it's crazy that I waited until this long before finally going through it. But anyway, that is about as much as I can fit into this particular video. I'm catching myself going on rambles and wanting to include all sorts of other stuff that will kind of dilute this video. So we're going to cut it there, but it's very clear that I recommend this game to anybody who is a Final Fantasy fan in general, but especially a Final Fantasy VII fan. If you're like me and you have just been putting this game off for whatever reason, it's time to give it a try. It took me between 13 to 15 hours to get everything I wanted out of it. You can put it on normal and get through just for the story. There's nothing stopping you from doing that if that's all you're interested in, and you will still have a good time. If you like some more chunky combat, throw it on hard and do a few more missions than I did and fine tune your build a little bit because that stuff is there for players like you as well. It's certainly not perfect. There are things I wish they did a little bit better, but when it all comes down to completing this game and how I feel about it, I'm just really happy. I'm still sitting here wanting to gush about it, and that's a good sign. Those are my thoughts on Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII Reunion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoy these types of videos, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more in the future. I'm branching out of my comfort zone a little bit with this one. I would love to include more story-focused games in these videos I've been making recently. They tend to take a little bit longer. A lot of the games I want to play and do videos on take 40, 60, 80 hours to complete. So I've got projects working in the background. But until then, I will see you in the next one.